What's up, dudes and dudes to the internet? My name's Seth, and today we're going to be talking about the Binding Darkness resource in Trove, where you can actually get it, and why it's so difficult to actually farm, and why it's also an item that you want to farm. So, if we go over to an Adventurer's Crafting table, go down to the gem section, you're going to see the Chaos Spark right here, which is actually an item that will re-roll one of your gem stats. This is an essential required item in order to actually make your character super duper powerful. But the fact of the matter is that what it re-rolls on the gem is going to end up being to a random stat. So potentially you could get the wrong stat over and over and over again, like I have been, and then you're gonna end up getting really frustrated. But then you realize that you've been playing Trove for years and there's no reason to get frustrated because there's just some aspects of the game that just suck, but you just gotta deal with it anyways. I'm just joking. So the Binding Darkness is going to be this resource right here, and it says that it's actually found in gem booster boxes. Hashtag confirmed. That is pretty much not true, like, at all. You're rarely going to end up getting the Binding Darkness out of gem booster boxes, if at all. Same with the Empower gem boxes. Again, you're not going to end up getting Binding Darkness. It's not an item, it's not worth buying gem booster boxes or buying the Radiant Pancakes to get Empower gem boxes or anything like that. Pay to win players, be warned, it's just not, like, worth it. Like, unless you're spending, like, way too much money, and even then it's not going to be a very viable option to end up getting the Binding Darkness out of those boxes. But, most of all, rarely found from world bosses. So before you start pulling your hair out and thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to go into Uber Worlds and I'm going to have to grind the bosses over and over. Nope. Don't worry about that one, folks, because if you just go on over to the Shadow Tower Arena, this is where you're going to end up getting the Binding Darkness. Now, before we hop into a portal here, I do want to mention that I really don't think that the Binding Darkness can even spawn in normal mode out of elite mob enemies. Because I've gone through normal mode, Dreadnought, just to farm for the mount, over 250 times, and I haven't gotten a single Binding Darkness out of any of those runs. Now, granted, it's not like I was purposely going out of my way to kill the elite mobs or the mini bosses, but still, you would have thought I would have got a few. Like, really? So instead, we're actually going to be hopping over into hard mode. And there's going to be two things that I'm going to tell you right here that you're going to watch out for. Let's actually open up Dreadnought just so I can show you what you're not looking for, which is actually going to be a Shadow Arena. Now, you may have heard me or other Trove content creators talk about the Shadow Towers, or Shadow Arenas and Shadow Dungeons, without actually explaining what each of those are. So this is going to end up being a Shadow Arena, which is just an arena. It's a small little area that's going to end up having one cursed skull in the center that's going to end up spawning tons and tons of enemies that you're going to end up destroying. Whereas the Shadow Dungeon is going to be just that, a dungeon. It's going to be a bigger, more expansive area that's going to end up having a bunch of different enemies and stuff like that. So let's actually go to hard. Spikewalker, I think he's the one that's actually got the dungeons going on for at least the week that I'm recording this, because each of the rotation of the Shadow Arenas and dungeons and stuff like that for each of the bosses is going to actually randomize for each week. So when the Shadow Tower resets, each of the dungeons are going to end up changing their order and changing the way that they actually generate and stuff. So yeah, for right here anyways, as I'm recording this video, although the Shadow Tower probably ended up resetting by the time this video comes out to all of you, this is a Shadow Dungeon. So in the Shadow Dungeon, you're going to find normal enemies and stuff like that. The reason why this is important is because the Shadow Arena enemies, or even just any enemies that spawn on a cursed skull, those enemies actually don't drop any resources. That's why even when you're killing the enemies for quests and stuff like that, when you're trying to get a specific resource, like with the UFO event, you actually can't get resources off of cursed skull enemies. However, if you have to kill 500 enemies or something like that, then it will actually count towards killing the enemy rather than actually counting towards dropping specific resources. So right here, we've already got an elite mob. We just kill that guy. He had a chance to end up dropping a Binding Darkness. That guy had a chance of dropping Binding Darkness. That guy had a chance. That guy had a chance. However, I'm not seeing any Binding Darkness at all. Unfortunately, this resource is particularly hard to grind, folks, because it is a rare chance, of course. But what you're going to be looking for in the long run is a Shadow Dungeon that either, like, there's going to be one or two things that you're going to be looking for. One is just which Shadow Titan boss is going to end up having more shadow dungeons. Ideally, you're wanting all 3 of the arenas before the boss, because there's always going to be 3 before you end up actually getting to the boss. Ideally, you want 3 shadow dungeons in a row, because, oh, stellar, because that's going to end up upping your chances of finding the elite mobs and thus going to increase your odds of actually getting the Binding Darkness. However, you might notice that maybe one of the shadow dungeons didn't end up generating that many enemies, so you might end up wanting to actually skip that and go for a different area. Another thing that you can end up doing too is having a shadow dungeon generate all of the elite mobs at the beginning. Now, in that case, that's pretty much the luckiest you can get, and thus the Binding Darkness, like, you're gonna want to grind that as much as you can. Because if you end up actually generating a shadow dungeon that has all of the elite mobs at the beginning, it means that you can go in, kill them all in 2 seconds, leave, go into build mode, hopefully you're in a club world anyways, destroy the Shadow Tower portal, replant it so that you can reopen the portal, rinse and repeat until infinitum. Like, seriously, you just do it over and over and over again until you end up getting all the Binding Darkness that you need. It's as boring as it sounds. It's not really attractive or fun gameplay, honestly speaking, but it's a requirement in order to get the Binding Darkness. Now, the reason that I wanted to show you this right here is, while this is going to end up being the exact same dungeon generation that we just saw, you're going to notice that the enemy layout is actually quite different. So it's not going to end up being like, if you find the same shadow dungeon, like same dungeon itself, I mean, like we just saw 2 seconds ago, we were already in this arena, and it just ended up generating, like, there was like 3 elite mobs in here, there was 1 back in that room, there was another one over at the end there. So the enemies are going to end up being random every time that these dungeons end up generating as well. So it's random on random, and that's the whole thing, is you can end up either finding tons and tons of enemies, or you can just find only a little bit. Like, that's why you really gotta try and go through the Shadow Towers on normal mode if you can, or hard mode, whatever you grind your Shadow Towers on, like whatever difficulty it is, go through it, just so that you can at least find out each week which arena, or which Shadow Titan, I guess I should say, is going to end up generating with more Shadow Arenas and more Shadow Dungeons. Because this third one, as far as I know right here, after we end up killing this guy, is going to actually end up being a Shadow Arena, meaning that what I was doing for the previous week was I was going through these 2 shadow dungeons, then I would just go to the club world and replant the portal so that I can end up opening it over and over and over again, because otherwise you're going to end up going back to your club world and the portal's going to still be open. The shadow lobby is going to be useless for this because, unfortunately, there's no way to force close any of the Shadow Tower portals. Oh, except in this case, this one actually ended up closing right away. So anyways, let's hop on over here just because I want to talk a little bit more about the Binding Darkness in general, because unfortunately, it is a required item. I think that if the devs would ever end up buffing the odds of actually getting it out of gem booster boxes or in power gem boxes, that would be great. Then I might have to put out a new tutorial video that would actually explain that that's actually a more viable way of doing it, especially because of the fact that you could end up then being completely pay to win and just getting all the gem booster boxes and power gem boxes that you want in order to end up getting the Binding Darkness, which I would do if I could, because I'm pay to win and I don't care to say it. Like, seriously, I've been playing this game for a long enough time to know I don't want to grind this. Like, it gets really, really boring. However, one thing that I think they could really stand to do, because unfortunately the pay to win in this game is really, really bad lately. I mean, I have another video that's honestly going to talk about some of the things that I personally as a player think are kind of wrong with the game. And one of them is the Binding Darkness, as well as a bunch of other resources. Honestly speaking, I would rather just see in the cash shop on its own. But the devs are of the mind that they want you to buy gem booster boxes or empower gem boxes for a chance to end up getting the Binding Darkness, because that's going to end up generating them more revenue, rather than just letting players end up paying specifically for the resource that they want, which might not generate as much revenue, but in my mind would be equally as important, because it would actually generate a little bit more respect. Now, I know that what you're thinking, I know that most of you are probably sitting there going, how would that get respect? That's even more obvious that the game is pay to win. that would just make me quit. But the fact is that the option of it being there is something that I personally, as a player of video games, think is very important. It's the same as how the double experience potions, for some reason, are still thrown in packs, rather than just being in a section in the shop. It just doesn't really make sense to me, because you look at Korean games, they're a perfect role model for pay-to-win games where you can just buy double experience potions. And in those games, if you log out, the double experience potion doesn't expire. Doesn't expire is what I tried to say. But anyways, I don't want to get into any of that. Thank you so much for watching. Very much appreciate it. Hope you found this video helpful, folks. I really, really do. Don't forget to like, share, favorite, and subscribe for more daily content. All of that is also going to end up generating loyalty points for my merch store. Links are in the description for that you can spend on rewards and junk like that. Sign over and stay epic.